Hey everybody, this is Allison from Allykatkreations. How are you? I'm hanging. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to my videos. It's reaching more people. Going to continue on with Carlos Castaneda today. A lot of goodies have been coming out of this book. Lots and lots of good goodies. And I saved this chapter. It's pretty lengthy, but we're going to get through it. I got my co-host over here sleeping. There she is. Say hi. It's still cold here. I'm chilly. And I also have a lot of static happening. So if you see my hair, even though it's very long, goes up, you'll know why. So today we're going to read The Interplay of Energy on the Horizon. The clarity of the usher brought a new impetus to my recapitulation. There we go. A new mood replaced the old one. From then on, I began to recollect events in my life with maddening clarity. It was exactly as if a barrier had been built inside me that had kept me holding rigidly onto meager and unclear memories, and the usher had smashed it. My memory faculty had been for me, prior to that, a vague event. A vague way of referring to things that had happened, but which I wanted most of the time to forget. Basically, I had no interest whatsoever in remembering anything of my life. Therefore, I honestly saw absolutely no point in the futile existence of recapitulating, which Don Juan had practically imposed on me. For me, it was a chore that tired me instantly and did nothing but point out my incapacity for concentrating. I had dutifully made nevertheless lists of people I had engaged in a haphazard effort of quasi-remembering my interactions with them. My lack of clarity in bringing those people into focus didn't dissuade me. I fulfilled what I considered to be my duty, regardless of the way I felt. With practice, the clarity of my recollection improved. I thought remarkably, I was able to descend, so to speak, on certain choice events with a fair amount of keenness that was at once scary and rewarding. After Don Juan presented me with the idea of the usher, however, the power of my recollection became something for which I had no name. Following my list of people made the recapitulation extremely formal and stringent, the way Don Juan wanted it. But from time to time, something in me got loose. Something that forced me to focus on events unrelated to my list. Events whose clarity was so maddening that I was caught and submerged in them, perhaps even more intensely than I had been when I lived the experiences themselves. Every time I recapitulated in such a fashion, I had a degree of detachment which allowed me to see things I had disregarded when I really been in the throes of them. The first time in which the recollection of an event shook me to my foundations happened after I'd given a lecture at a college in Oregon. The students in charge of organizing the lecture took me and another anthropology friend of mine to a house to spend the night. I was going to go to a motel, but they insisted for our comfort on taking us to this house. They said that it was in the country and there was no noise. The quietest place in the world, with no telephones, no interference from the outside world. I, like the fool thought I was, agreed to go with them. Don Juan had not only warned me to always be a solitary bird, he had demanded that I observe his recommendation, something that I did most of the time. But there were occasions when the gregarious creature in me took the upper hand. The committee took us to the house, quite a distance from Portland, of a professor who was on sabbatical. Very swiftly, they turned on the lights inside and outside of the house, which was located on a hill with spotlights all around it. With the spotlights on, the house must have been visible from 5 miles away. After that, the committee took off as fast as they could, something that surprised me because I thought they were going to stay and talk. The house was a wooden A-frame, small, but very well constructed. It had an enormous living room and a mezzanine above it, where the bedroom was. Right above, at the apex of the A-frame, there was a life-size crucifix hanging from a strange rotating hinge, which was drilled into the head of the figure. I'm sorry, that don't sound right. The spotlights on the wall were focused on the crucifix. It was quite an impressive sight, especially when it rotated, squeaking as if the hinge needed oil. Ethan's talking, he says hi. The bathroom of the house was another sight. It had mirrored tiles on the ceiling, the walls, and the floor. It was illuminated with a reddish light. There was no way to go to the bathroom without seeing yourself from every conceivable angle. I enjoyed all those features of the house, which seemed to me stupendous. When the time came for me to go to sleep, however, I encountered a serious problem because there was only one narrow, hard, quiet monastic bed, and my anthropologist friend was close to having pneumonia, wheezing and retching phlegm every time he coughed. He went straight for the bed and passed out. I looked for a place to sleep. I couldn't find one. The house was barren of comforts. Besides, it was cold. The committee had turned on the lights, but not the heater. I looked for the heater. My search was fruitless, as was my search for the switch to the spotlights or any of that lights in the house, for the matter. The switches were on the walls. They seemed to be overruled by the effect of some main switch. The lights were on. I had no way to turn them off. The only place I could find sleep was on a thin throw rug, and the only thing I found with which I could cover myself was the tan hide of a giant French poodle. Obviously, it had been the pet of the house and had been preserved. It had shiny black marble eyes and an open mouth with a tongue hanging out. I had put the head of the poodle, oh my God, skin toward my knees. I still had to cover myself with the tan rear end, which was on my neck. Oh my goodness. Its preserved head was like a hard object between my knees, quite unsettling. If it had been dark, it wouldn't have been as bad. I gathered a bundle of washcloths and used them as pillows. I used as many as possible to cover the hide of the French poodle. I'm sorry, it's not funny, but oh my gosh, how absurd. The best way I could. I couldn't sleep all night. It was then, as I laid there, cursing myself silently for being so stupid and not following Don Juan's recommendation, that I had the first maddening, clear recollection of my entire life. I had recollected the event that Don Juan had called the usher with equal clarity, but my tenacity had always been to high disregard that what happened to me when I was with Don Juan, on the basis that in his presence anything was possible. This time, however, I was alone. Years before I met Don Juan, I had worked painting signs on buildings. My boss's name was Luigi Palma. One day, Luigi got a contract to paint a sign advertising the sale and rental of bridal gowns and tuxedos on the back wall of an old building. The owner of the store in the building wanted to catch the eye of possible customers with a large display. Luigi was going to paint a bride and groom, and I was going to do the lettering. He went to the flat roof of the building and set up a scaffold. I was quite apprehensive, although I had no overt reason to be so. I had painted dozens of signs on high buildings. Luigi thought that I was beginning to be afraid of heights, but that my fear was going to pass. When the time came to start working, he lowered the scaffold a few feet from the roof and jumped on its flat boards. He went to one side while I stood on the other in order to be totally out of his way. He was the artist. Luigi began to show off. His painting movements were so erratic and agitated that the scaffold moved back and forth. I became dizzy. I wanted to go back to the flat roof using the pretext that I needed more paint and another painter's paraphernalia. I grabbed the edge of the wall that framed the flat roof and tried to hoist myself up, but the tips of my feet got stuck in the boards of the scaffold. I tried to pull my feet and the scaffold toward the wall. The harder I pulled, the further away I pushed the scaffold from the wall. Instead of helping my untangle my feet, Luigi sat down and braced himself with the cords that attached the scaffold to the flat roof. He crossed himself and looked at me in horror. From his sitting position, he knelt, weeping quietly as he recited the Lord's Prayer. I held on to the edge of the wall for dear life. What gave me the desperate strength to endure was a certainty that if I was in control, I could keep the scaffold from moving further and further away. I wasn't going to lose my grip and fall 13 floors to my death. Luigi, being a compulsive taskmaster to the bitter end, yelled at me in the midst of my tears that I should pray. He swore that both of us were going to fall to our deaths and that the least we could do was pray for the salvation of our souls. For a moment, I deliberated about whether it was functional to pray. I opted to yell for help. People in the building must have heard my yelling and sent for the firemen. I sincerely thought that I had taken only 2 or 3 seconds after I began to yell for firemen to come onto the roof and grab Luigi and me and secure the scaffold. In reality, I had hung on the side of the building for at least 20 minutes. When the firemen finally pulled me onto the roof, I had lost my vestige of control. I vomited on the hard floor of the roof, sick to my stomach from fear and an odious smell of melted tar. It was a very hot day. The tar on the cracks of the scratchy roof sheets were melting in the heat. The ordeal had been so frightening and embarrassing that I didn't want to remember it, and I ended up hallucinating that the firemen had pulled me into a warm yellow room. They had then put me in a supremely comfortable bed, and I had fallen peacefully asleep, safe, wearing my pajamas delivered from danger. My second recollection was another blast of immeasurable force. I was talking admirably to a group of friends when, for no apparent reason I could account for, I suddenly lost my breath under the impact of a thought, a memory, which was vague for an instant, and then become an engrossing experience. Its force was so intense that I had to excuse myself and retreat for a moment to a corner. My friends seemed to understand my reaction. They disbanded without any comments. What I was remembering was an incident that had taken place in my last year of high school. My best friend and I used to walk to school, passing a big mansion with a black wrought iron fence, at least 7 feet high and ending in pointed spikes. Behind the fence was an extensive, well-kept green lawn and a huge, ferocious German Shepherd dog. Every day, we used to tease the dog and let him chase us. He stopped physically at the wrought iron fence, but his rage seemed to cross over to us. My friend delighted in engaging the dog every day in a contest of mind over matter. He used to stand a few inches from the dog's snout when protruding between the iron bars at least 6 inches into the street, and bare his teeth just like the dog did. Yield, yield, my friend shouted every time. Obey, obey. I am more powerful than you. His daily displays of mental power, which lasted at least 5 minutes, never affected the dog outside of leaving him more ferocious than ever. My friend assured me daily, as part of his ritual, that the dog was either going to obey him or die in front of us, of heart failure brought about by rage. His conviction was so intense that I believed that the dog was going to drop dead any day. One morning, when we came around, the dog wasn't there. We waited for a moment, but we didn't show up. Then we saw him at the end of the expensive lawn. He seemed to be busy there, so we slowly began to walk away. From the corner of my eyes, I noticed the dog was running full speed toward us. When he was perhaps 6 or 7 feet from the fence, he took a gigantic leap over it. I was sure that he was going to rip his belly on the spikes. He barely cleared them and fell into the street like a sack of potatoes. I thought for a moment that he was dead, but he was only stunned. Suddenly he got up, and instead of chasing after the one who had brought about his rage, he ran after me. I jumped onto the roof of a car, but the car was nothing for the dog. He took a leap and was nearly on top of me. I scrambled down and climbed the first tree that was within my reach, a flimsy little tree that could barely support my weight. I was sure that it would snap in the middle, sending me right into the dog's jaws to be mauled to death. In the tree, I was nearly out of his reach, but the dog jumped again and snapped his teeth, catching me by the seat of my pants and ripping them. His teeth actually nicked my buttocks. The moment I was safe at the top of the tree, the dog left. He just ran up and down the street, perhaps looking for my friend. At the infirmary in school, the nurse told me that I had to ask the owner of the dog for a certificate of rabies vaccination. You must look into this, she said severely. You may have rabies already. If the owner refuses to show you the vaccination certificate, you are within your rights to call the police. I talked to the caretaker of the mansion where the dog lived. He accused me of luring the owner's most valuable dog, a pedigree animal, out into the street. You better watch out, boy, he said in angry tone. The dog got lost. The owner will send you to jail if you keep on bothering us. But I may have rabies, I said in a sincerely terrified tone. I don't give a shit if you have a bubonic plague, the man snapped. Scram. I'll call the cops. I'll call the police, I said. Call whoever you like, he retorted. You call the police, we'll turn them against you. In this house, we have enough clap to do that. I believed him, so I lied to the nurse and said that the dog could not be found and that it had no owner. Oh my God, the woman exclaimed, then brace yourself for the worst. I might have to send you to the doctor. She gave me a long list of symptoms that I should look for or wait until they manifest themselves. She said that the injections for rabies were extremely painful and that they had been administered subcutaneously in the area of the abdomen. I wouldn't wish that treatment on my worst enemy, she said, plunging me into a horrid nightmare. What followed was my first real depression. I just laid in my bed, feeling every one of the symptoms enumerated by the nurse. I ended up going to school infirmary and begging the woman to give me the treatment for rabies, no matter how painful. I made a huge scene. I became hysterical. I didn't have rabies, but I had totally lost my control. I related to Don Juan my 2 recollections in all their detail, sparing nothing. He didn't make any comments. He nodded a few times. In both recollections, Don Juan, I said, feeling myself, the urgency of my voice. I was as hysterical as anyone could be. My body was trembling. I was sick to my stomach. I didn't want to say it as if I were the experiences, because that's not the truth. I was in the experiences themselves, both times. And when I couldn't take them anymore, I jumped into my life now. For me, that was a jump into the future. I had the power of going over time. My jump into the past was not abrupt. The event developed slowly, as memories do. It was at the end that I jumped abruptly into the future, my life now. Something in you has begun to collapse for sure, he finally said. It has been collapsing all along, but it repaired itself very quickly every time its supports failed. My feeling is that it is now collapsing totally. After another long silence, Don Juan explained that the sorcerers of ancient Mexico believed that, as he had told me already, we had two minds, and only one of them was truly ours. I had always understood Don Juan as saying that there were two parts to our minds, and one of them were always silent because expression was denied to it by the force of the other part. Whatever Don Juan had said, I had been taken as a metaphorical way to explain perhaps the apparent dominance of the left hemisphere of the brain over the right, or over something like that. There is a secret option to recapitulation, Don Juan said. Just like that, I told you there is a secret option to dying, an option that only sorcerers take. In the case of dying, the secret option is that human beings could retain their life force and relinquish only their awareness, the product of their lives. In the case of recapitulation, the secret option that only sorcerers take is to choose enhance their true minds. The haunting memory of your recollections, he went on, could come only from your true mind. The other mind that we all have and share is, I would say, a cheap model, economy strength, one size fits all. But this is a subject that we will discuss later. What is at stake now is the advent of disintegrating force, but not a force that is disintegrating you. I don't mean it that way. It is disintegrating what the sorcerers call the foreign installation, which exists in you and every other human being. The effect of the force that is descending on you, which is in disintegrating the foreign installation, is that it pulls sorcerers out of their syntax. I listened carefully to Don Juan, but I couldn't say that I had understood what he had said. For some strange reason, which was to me unknown, as the cause of my vivid recollections, I couldn't ask him any questions. I know how difficult it is for you, Don Juan said, all of a sudden to deal with this facet of your life. Every sorcerer that I know has gone through it. The males going through it suffer indefinitely more damage than the females. I suppose it's the condition of women to be more durable. The sorcerers of ancient Mexico, acting as a group, tried their best to buttress the impact of this disintegrating force. In our day, we had no means of acting as a group, so we must brace ourselves to face it in solitude, a force that will sweep us away from language, but there is no way to describe adequately what's going on. Don Juan was right in that I was at a loss for explanations or ways of describing the effect that those recollections had on me. Don Juan had told me the sorcerers face the unknown in the most common incidents one can imagine. When they are confronted with it and cannot interpret what they are perceiving, they have to rely on the outside source for direction. Don Juan had called that the source infinity, or the voice of the spirit, and had said that if sorcerers don't try to be rational about what can't be, rationalized, the spirit unearthling tells them what's what. Don Juan had guided me to accept the idea that infinity was a force that had a voice and was conscious of itself. Consequently, he had prepared me to be ready to listen to the voice and act efficiently always, but without antecedents, using a little as possible the railings of the priori. I waited impatiently for the voice of the spirit to tell me the meaning of my recollections, but nothing happened. I was in a bookstore one day with a girl, recognized me, and came over to talk to me. She was tall and slim and had an insecure little girl's voice. I was trying to make her feel at ease when I was suddenly accosted by an instantaneous energetic charge. It was as if an alarm had been triggered in me, and as it happened in the past without violation on my part whatsoever, I recollected another completely forgotten event in my life. The memory of my grandparents' house flooded me. It was a veritable avalanche, so intense that it was devastating, and at once more, I had to retreat to a corner. My body shook as if I had taken a chill. I must have been 8 years old. My grandfather was talking to me. He had begun to tell me that it was his utmost duty to set me straight. I had 2 cousins who were my age, Alfredo and Louis. My grandfather demanded mercilessly that I admit that my cousin Alfredo was really beautiful. In my vision, I heard my grandfather's raspy, constricted voice. Alfredo doesn't need any introductions, he had said to me on that occasion. He needs only to be present and the doors will fly open for him, because everybody practices the cult of beauty. Everybody likes beautiful people. They envy them, but they certainly seek their company. Take it from me, I am handsome, wouldn't you say? I sincerely agreed with my grandfather. He was certainly a very handsome man, small-boned, with laughing blue eyes, and an exquisitely chiseled face with beautiful cheekbones. Everything seems to be perfectly balanced in his face. His nose, his mouth, his eyes, his pointed jaw. He had blonde hair growing on his ears, a feature that gave him an elf-like appearance. He knew everything about himself, and he exploited his attributes to the maximum. Women adored him, first, according to him, for his beauty, and second, because he posed no threat to them. He, of course, took full advantage of this. Your cousin Alfredo is a winner, my grandfather went on. He will never have to crash a party because he'll be the first one on the list of guests. Have you ever noticed how people stop in the street to look at him and how they want to touch him? He's so beautiful that I'm afraid he's going to turn out to be an asshole, but that's a different story. Let us say that he'll be the most welcomed asshole you'll ever met. My grandfather compared my cousin Louis with Alfredo. He said that Louis was homely and a little bit stupid, but that he had a heart of gold, and that he brought me into the picture. If we are going to proceed with our explanation, he continued, you have to admit in sincerity that Alfredo is beautiful and Louis is good. Now let's take you. You are neither handsome nor good. You are a veritable son of a bitch. Nobody's going to invite you to a party. You'll have to get used to the idea that if you want to be at a party, you have to crash it. Doors will never be open for you the way they will open for Alfredo for being beautiful and for Louis for being good. So you'll have to get through the window. His analysis of his 3 grandsons was so accurate that he made me weep with finality of what he had said. The more I wept, the happier he became. He finished his case with the most delicious admiration. There's no need to feel bad, he said, because there's nothing more exciting than getting through the window. To do that, you have to be clever on your toes. You have to watch everything and be prepared for endless humiliations. If you have to go in through the window, he went on, it's because you definitely not on the list of guests. Therefore, your presence is not welcomed at all. So you have to work your butt off to stay. The only way I know is by possessing everybody. Scream, demand advice. Make them feel that you are in charge. How could they throw you out if you're in charge? Remembering this scene caused a profound upheaval in my life. I had buried this incident so deeply that I'd forgotten all about it. What I remembered all along, however, was his admiration to be in charge, which he must have repeated to me over and over throughout the years. I didn't have a chance to examine this event or ponder it because another forgotten memory surfaced with the same force. In it, I was with the girl I had been engaged to. At the time, both of us were saving money to be married and have a house of our own. I heard myself demanding that we have a joint checking account. I wouldn't have it any other way. I felt an imperative need to lecture her on frugality. I heard myself telling her where to buy her clothes and what the top affordable price should be. Then I saw myself giving driving lessons to her young sister and going veritably berserk when she said that she was planning to move out of her parents' house. Forcibly, I threatened her with canceling my lessons. She wept, confessing that she was having an affair with her boss. I jumped out of the car and began kicking the door. However, that was not all. I heard myself telling my fiance's father not to move to Oregon, where he planned to go. I shouted at the top of my voice that it was a stupid move. I really believed that my reasonings against it were unbeatable. I presented him with the budget figures in which I had meticulously calculated his losses. Why he didn't pay any attention to me, I slammed the door and left, shaking with rage. I found my fiancée in the living room playing her guitar. I pulled it out of her hands and yelled at her that she embraced the guitar instead of playing it, as if it were more than an object. My desire to impose my will extended all across the board. I made no distinctions. Whoever was close to me was there for me to possess and mold, following my whims. I didn't have to ponder anymore the significance of my vivid visions, for an unquestionable certainty invaded me, as if coming from the outside of me. It told me that my weak point was the idea that I had to be the man in the director's chair at all times. It had been a deeply ingrained concept with me that I not only had to be in charge, but I had to be in control of any situation. The way in which I had been brought up had reinforced this drive, which must have been arbitrary at its onset, but had turned into my adulthood into a deep necessity. I was aware beyond any doubt that what was at stake was infinity. Don Juan had portrayed it as a conscious force that deliberately intervenes in the lives of sorcerers. And now it was intervening in mine. I knew that infinity was pointing out to me through the vivid recollection of these forgotten experiences, the intensity and the depth of my drive for control, and thus preparing me for something transcendental to myself. I knew with frightening certainty that something was going to bar any possibility of my being in control, and that I needed more than anything else sobriety, fluidity, and abandon in order to face the things that I felt were coming to me. Naturally, I told all this to Don Juan, elaborating to my heart's content on my speculations and inspirational insights about the possible significance of my recollections. Don Juan laughed good-humoredly. All this is psychological exaggeration on your part, wishful thinking, he said. You are, as usual, seeking explanations with linear cause and effect. Each of your recollections becomes more and more vivid, more and more maddening to you. Because I told you already, you have entered an irreversible process. Your true mind is emerging, waking up from a state of lifelong lethargy. Infinity is claiming you, he continued. Whatever means it uses to point that out to you cannot have any other reason, any other cause, any other value than that. What you should do, however, is to be prepared for the onslaught of infinity. You must be in a state of continuously bracing yourself for a blow of tremendous magnitude. That is the sane, sober way in which sorcerers face infinity. Don Juan's words left me with a bad taste in my mouth. I actually sensed the assault coming on me and feared it. Since I had spent my entire life hiding behind some superfluous activity, I immersed myself in work. I gave lectures and classes taught by my friends in different schools in Southern California. I wrote copiously. I could say without exaggeration that I threw dozens of manuscripts into the garbage can because they didn't fulfill an indispensable requirement that Don Juan had described to me as the mark of something that is acceptable by infinity. Guys, sorry for the mispronunciations and a little bit of a pause. I'm trying not to lose my teeth here. He had said that everything I did had to be an act of sorcery, an act free from encroaching expectations, fears of failure, hopes of success, free from the cult of me. Everything I did had to be impromptu, a work of magic, where I freely opened myself to the impulses of the infinite. One night I was sitting at my desk preparing myself for my daily activity of writing. I felt a moment of grogginess. I thought that I was feeling dizzy because I had gotten up too quickly from my mat where I had been doing my exercises. My vision blurred. I saw yellow spots in front of my eyes. I thought I was going to faint. The fainting spell got worse. There was an enormous red spot in front of me. I began to breathe deeply, trying to quiet whatever agitation was causing this visual distortion. I became extraordinarily silent, to the point where I noticed that I was surrounded by impenetrable darkness. The thought crossed my mind that I had fainted. However, I could feel the chair, my desk, and I could feel everything around me from inside the darkness that surrounded me. Don Juan had said that the sorcerers of his lineage considered that one of the most coveted results of inner silence was a specific interplay of energy, which is always heralded by a strong emotion. He felt that my recollections were the means to agitate me to the extreme, where I would experience this interplay. Such an interplay manifested itself in terms of hues that were projected on any horizon in the world of everyday life, be it a mountain, the sky, a wall, or simply the palms of my hands. He had examined that this interplay of hues begins with the appearance of a tenacious brushstroke of lavender on the horizon. In time, the lavender brushstroke starts to expand until it covers the visible horizon, like advancing storm clouds. He assured me that a dot of peculiar rich pomegranate red shows up as if bursting from the lavender clouds. He stated that as sorcerers become more disciplined and experienced, the dot of pomegranate expands and finally explodes into thoughts or visions, or in the case of a literate man, into written words. Sorcerers either see visions engendered by energy, hear thoughts being voiced as words, or read written words. That night at my desk, I didn't see any lavender brushstrokes, nor did I see any advancing clouds. I was sure that I didn't have the discipline that sorcerers require for such an interplay of energy, but I had an enormous dot of pomegranate red in front of me. This enormous dot, without any preliminaries, exploded into a disassociated words that I read as if they were on a sheet of paper coming out of a typewriter. The words moved at such tremendous speed in front of me that it was impossible to read anything. Then I heard a voice describing something to me. Again, the speed of the voice was wrong for my ears. The words were garbled, making it impossible to hear anything that would make sense. As if that weren't enough, I began to see lavish scenes like one sees in dreams after a heavy meal. They were baroque, dark, ominous. I began to twirl, and I did so until I got sick to my stomach. The whole event ended there. I felt the effect of whatever had happened to me in every muscle of my body. I was exhausted. The violent intervention had made me angry and frustrated. I rushed to Don Juan's house to tell him about this happening. I sensed that I needed his help more than ever. There's nothing gentle about the sorcerers or sorcery, Don Juan commented after he heard my story. This was the first time that infinity descended on you in such a fashion. It was like a blitz. It was total takeover of your faculties. Insofar as the speed of your visions is concerned, you yourself will have to learn to adjust it. For some sorcerers, that's the job of a lifetime. But from now on, energy will appear to you as if you were being projected onto a movie screen. That's insane. Whether or not you understand the projection, he went on, is another matter. In order to make an accurate interpretation, you need experience. My recommendation is that you shouldn't be bashful and you should begin now. Read energy on the wall. Your mind is emerging and it has nothing to do with the mind that is a foreign installation. Let your true mind adjust the speed. Be silent and don't fret no matter what happens. But Don Juan, is all this possible? Can one actually read energy as if it were a text? I asked, overwhelmed by the idea. Of course it's possible, he retorted. In your case, it's not only possible, it's happening to you. But why reading it as if it were a text? I insisted, but it was a rhetorical instance. It's an affection of your part, he said. If you read the text, you could repeat it verbatim. However, if you tried to be a viewer of infinity instead of a reader of infinity, you would find that you could not describe whatever you were viewing, and you would end up babbling insanities, incapable of verbalizing what you witnessed. The same thing if you tried to hear it. This, of course, is specific to you. Anyway, infinity chooses. The warrior travel simply acquiesces to the choice. But above all, he added after a calculated pause, don't be overwhelmed by the event because you cannot describe it. It is an event beyond the syntax of our language. All right, I'm going to put my light back on. I'm having like this weird day. Lots of static activity. I had like my body started sweating. Going through the ascension. Journeys through the dark sea of awareness. We can speak a little more clearly now about inner silence, Don Juan said. The statement was such a non-squintiller that it startled me. He had been talking to me all afternoon about the vicissitudes that the Iroquois Indians had suffered after the big Iroquois Wars of the 1920s, when they were deported by the Mexican government from their native homeland in the state of Sonora in northern Mexico to work in sugarcane plantations in central and southern Mexico. The Mexican government had problems with epidemic wars with the Iroquois Indians for years, Don Juan told me. Some astounding, poignant Iroquois stories of political intrigue and betrayal, deprivation, and human misery. I had the feeling that Don Juan was setting me up for something because he knew that those stories were my cup of tea, so to speak. I had at the time an exaggerated sense of social justice and fair play. Circumstances around you had made it possible for you to have more energy, he went on. You have started the recapitulation of your life. You have looked at your friends for the first time as if they were in a display window. You arrived at your breaking point, all by yourself, driven by your own needs. You canceled your business, and above all, you have acquired enough inner silence. All of these made it possible for you to make a journey through the dark sea of awareness. Meeting me in the town of your choice was that journey, he continued. I know that a critical question almost reached the surface in you, and that for an instant you wondered if I really came to your house. My coming to see you wasn't a dream for you. I was real, wasn't I? You were as real as anything could be, I said. I nearly forgotten about those events, but I remembered that it did seem strange to me that I had found my apartment. I had discarded my astonishment by the simple process of assuming that he had asked someone for my new address. Although if I had been pressed, I wouldn't have been able to come up with the identity of anyone who would have known where I lived. Let us clarify this point, he continued. In my terms, which are the terms of the sorcerers of ancient Mexico, I was as real as I could have been. And as such, I actually went to your place from my inner silence to tell you about the requisite of infinity and to warn you that you are about to run out of time. And you, in turn, from your inner silence, variably went to that town of our choice to tell me that you had succeeded in fulfilling the requisite of infinity. In your terms, which are the terms of average man, it was a dream fantasy in both instances. You had a dream fantasy that I came to your place without knowing the address. And then you had a dream fantasy that you want to see me. As far as I'm concerned, as a sorcerer, what you consider your dream fantasy of meeting me in that town was real, as the two of us talking here today. I confessed to Don Juan that there was no possibility of my framing those events in my pattern of thought proper to Western man. I said that to think of them in terms of dream fantasy was to create a false category that couldn't stand up under scrutiny, and that the only quasi-explanation was the vaguely possible was another aspect of his knowledge, dreaming. No, it's not dreaming, he said emphatically. This is something more direct and more mysterious. By the way, I have a new definition of dreaming for you today, more in accordance with your state of being. Dreaming is the act of changing the point of attachment with the dark sea of awareness. If you view it in this fashion, it's a very simple concept and very simple maneuver. It takes all you have to realize it, but it's not impossibility, nor is it something surrounded with mystical clouds. Dreaming is a term that has always bugged the hell out of me, he continued, because it weakens a very powerful act. It makes it sound arbitrary. It gives it a sense of being a fantasy, and this is the only thing it is not. I try to change the term myself, but it's too ingrained. Maybe someday you could change it yourself. Although, as with everything else in sorcery, I am afraid that by the time you could actually do it, you won't give a damn about it because it won't make any difference what it is called anymore. Don Juan had explained at length during the entire time that I had known him that dreaming was an art, discovered by sorcerers of ancient Mexico, by means of which ordinary dreams were transferred into a bona fide entrances to other worlds of perception. He advocated in any way he could the advent of something he called dreaming attention, which was the capacity to pay a special kind of attention or to place a special kind of awareness on the elements of an ordinary dream. I had followed meticulously all his recommendations and had succeeded in commanding my awareness to remain fixed on the elements of a dream. The idea that Don Juan proposed was not to set out deliberately to have desired dream, but to fix one's attention on the component elements of whatever dream presented himself. Then Don Juan had showed me energetically what the sorcerers of ancient Mexico considered to be the origin of dreaming. The displacement of assemblage point, he said, that the assemblage was displaced very naturally during sleep, but that to see the displacement was a bit difficult because it required an aggressive mood, and that such aggressive mood had been the predilection of the sorcerers of ancient Mexico. Those sorcerers, according to Don Juan, had found all the premises of their sorcery by means of this mood. It is a very predatory mood, Don Juan went on. It's not difficult at all to enter into it, because man is a predator by nature. You could see aggressively anybody in this village, or perhaps someone far away while they are asleep. Anyone would do for the purpose at hand. What's important is that you arrive at complete sense of indifference. You're in search of something and you are out to get it. You're going to go out looking for a person, searching like a feline, like an animal of prey for someone to descend on. Don Juan had told me, laughing at my apparent jargon, that the difficulty with this technique was the mood, and that I couldn't be passive in the act of seeing, for the sight was not something to watch, but to act upon. It might have been the power of his suggestion, but that day when he had told me all this, I felt astoundingly aggressive. Every muscle of my body was filled to the brim with energy, and in my dreaming practice, I did go after someone. I was not interested in who that someone might be. I needed someone who was asleep and some force I was aware of, without being fully conscious of it. I had guided me into finding that someone. I never knew who that person was, but while I was seeing the person, I felt Don Juan's presence. It was a strange sensation of knowing that someone was with me by an undetermined sensation of proximity that was happening at a level of awareness that wasn't a part of anything that I had ever experienced. I can only focus my attention on the individual at rest. I knew that he was a male, but I didn't know how I knew that. I knew that he was asleep, but because the ball of energy that human beings ordinarily are was a little bit flat. It was expanded laterally. And then I saw the assemblage point at a position different from the habitual one, which is right behind the shoulder blades. In this instance, it had been displaced to the right of where it should have been, and a bit lower. I calculated that in this case, it had moved to the side of the ribs. Another thing that I noticed was that there was no stability to it. It fluctuated erratically and then abruptly went back to its normal position. I had the clear sensation that obviously my presence and Don Juan's had awakened the individual. I had experienced a profusion of blurred images right after that, and then I woke up back in the place where I had started. Don Juan had also told me all along the sorcerers were divided into two groups. One groups were dreamers, the other were stalkers. The dreamers were those who had a great facility for displacing the assemblage point. The stalkers were those who had a great facility for maintaining the assemblage point fixed on that new position. Dreamers and stalkers complemented each other and worked in pairs, affecting one another with their given proclivities. Don Juan had assured me that the displacement and the fixation of the assemblage point could be realized at will by means of the sorcerer's iron-handed discipline. He said that the sorcerers of his lineage believed that they were at least 600 points within the luminous sphere that we are, that when reached at will by the assemblage point, can each give us a total inclusion world, meaning that if our assemblage point is displaced to any of those points and remains fixed on it, we will perceive a world as inclusive and total as the world of everyday life, but a different world nonetheless. Don Juan had further explained that the art of sorcery is to manipulate the assemblage point and to make it change positions at will on the luminous sphere that human beings are. The result of this manipulation is a shift in the point of contact with the dark sea of awareness, which brings as it concomitant a different bundle of zillions of energy fields in the form of luminous filaments that converge on the assemblage point. The consequence of new energy fields converging on the assemblage point is the awareness of a different sort that then which is necessary for perceiving the world of everyday life, enters into action, turning the new energy fields into sensory data that is interpreted and perceived as a different world because the energy fields that engendered it are different from the habitual ones. He had asserted that an accurate definition of sorcery as practice would be to say that sorcery is a manipulation of assemblage point for purposes of changing its focal point of contact with the dark sea of awareness, thus making it possible to perceive other worlds. Don Juan had said that the art of the stalkers enters into play after the assemblage point has been displaced. Maintaining the assemblage point fixed in its new position assures sorcerers that they will perceive whatever new world they enter in its absolute completeness, exactly as we do in the world of ordinary affairs. For the sorcerers of Don Juan's lineage, the world of everyday life was but one fold of a total world consisting of at least 600 folds. Don Juan went back again to the topic under discussion, my journeys through the dark sea of awareness, and said that what I had done from my inner silence was very similar to what is done in dreaming when one is asleep. However, when journeying through the dark sea of awareness, there was no interpretation of any sort, because by going to sleep, nor was there any attempt whatsoever at controlling one's attention while having a dream. The journey through the darkness of the sea of awareness entailed an immediate response. There was an overpowering sensation of the here and now. Don Juan laminated the fact that one idiotic sorcerers had given the name dreaming awake to this act of reaching the dark sea of awareness directly, making the term dreaming even more ridiculous. When you thought you had the dream fantasy of going to the town of your choice, he continued, you had actually placed your assemblage point directly on a specific position on the dark sea of awareness that allows you to that journey. That dark sea of awareness supplied you with whatever was necessary to carry on that journey. There's no way whatsoever to choose that place at will. Sorcerers say that the inner silence selects its unerring. Simple, isn't it? He explained to me that the intricacies of choice, he said, choice for warrior travelers was not really the act of choosing, but rather the act of acquiescing elegantly to the solicitations of infinity. Infinity chooses, he said. The art of the warrior traveler is to have the ability to move with the slightest intuition, the art of acquiescing to every command of infinity. For this, a warrior traveler needs prowess, strength, and above everything else, sobriety. All those three put together give a result, elegance. After a moment's pause, I went back to the subject that intrigued me the most. But it's unbelievable that I actually went to that town, Don Juan, in my body and soul, I said. It is unbelievable, but it's not unlivable, he said. The universe has no limits, and the possibilities at play in the universe are at large, are indeed incommensurable. So don't fall prey to the axiom, I believe only what I see, because it is the dumbest stand one can possibly take. Don Juan's elucidation had been crystal clear. It made sense, but I didn't know where it made sense, certainly not in my daily world of usual affairs. Don Juan assured me that then, unleashing a great trepidation in me, that there was only one way in which sorcerers can handle all this information, to taste it through experience, because the mind was incapable of taking in all that stimulation. What do you want me to do, Don Juan? I asked. You must deliberately journey through the dark sea of awareness, he replied, but you'll never know how this is done. Let's say the inner silence does it, following inexplicable ways that cannot be understood, but only practiced. Don Juan had me sit down on my bed and adopt the position that fostered inner silence. I usually fell asleep instantly whenever I adopted this position. However, when I was with Don Juan, his presence always made it impossible for me to fall asleep. Instead, I entered into a veritable state of complete quietude. This time, after an instant of silence, I found myself walking. Don Juan was guiding me by holding my hand as we walked. We were no longer in his house. We were walking in a Uruguay town I had never been in before. I knew of the town's existence. I had been close to it many times, but I had been made to turn around by the sheer hostility of the people who lived around it. It was a town where it was nearly impossible for a stranger to enter. The only non-Uruguayans who had free access to the town were the supervisors from the federal bank, because of the fact that the bank brought the crops from the Uruguay farmers. The endless negotiations of the Uruguay farmers revolved around getting cash advances from the bank on the basis of a near speculation process of future crops. I instantly recognized the town from the descriptions of people who had been there. As if to increase my astonishment, Don Juan whispered in my ear that we were in the Uruguay town in question. I wanted to ask him how we had gotten there, but I couldn't articulate my words. There were a large number of Indians talking in argumentative tones. Tempers seemed to be flared. I didn't understand a word of what they were saying, but the moment I thought that I couldn't understand something cleared up. It was very much as if more light went into the scene. Things became very defined and neat. And I understood what the people were saying, although I didn't know how. I didn't speak their language. The words were definitely understandable to me, not singularly, but in clusters, as if my mind could pick up whole patterns of thought. I could say in earnest that I got the shock of my lifetime, not so much because I understood what they were saying, but because of the content of what they were saying. Those people who were indeed warlike, they were not Western men at all. Their propositions were propositions of strife, warfare, and strategy. They were measuring their strength, their striking resonance, and laminating the fact that they had no power to deliver their blows. I registered in my body the anguish of their impotence. All that they had were sticks and stones to fight high technology weapons. They mourned the fact that they had no leaders. They coveted more than anything else one could imagine the rise of some charismatic fighter who can galvanize them. I heard then the voice of cynicism. One of them expressed a thought that seemed to devastate everyone equally, including me, for I had seemed to be an indivisible part of them. He said that they were defeated beyond salvation because at a given moment, one of them had the charisma to rise up and rally them, but he would betray because of the envy and jealousy and hurt feelings. I wanted to comment to Don Juan on what was happening to me, but I couldn't voice a single word. Only Don Juan could talk. The Iroquois are not unique in their pettiness, he said in my ear. It is a condition in which human beings are trapped, a condition that is not even human, but imposed from the outside. I felt my mouth opening and closing involuntarily as I tried desperately to ask a question that I could not even conceive of. My mind was blank, void of thoughts. Don Juan and I were in the middle of a circle of people, but none of them seemed to have noticed us. I did not record any moment, reaction, or furtive glance that may have indicated that they were aware of us. The next instant, I found myself in a Mexican town built around a railroad station, a town located about 1.5 miles east of where Don Juan lived. Don Juan and I were in the middle of a street by the government bank. Immediately after, I saw one of the strangest sights I had ever been witness to in Don Juan's world. I was seeing energy as it flowed in the universe, but I wasn't seeing human beings as spherical or oblong blobs of energy. The people around me were in one instant the normal beings of everyday life, and in the next instant, they were strange creatures. strange creatures. It was as if the ball of energy that we are were transparent. It was like a halo around an insect-like core. That core did not have a primate's shape. There were no skeletal pieces, so I wasn't seeing people as if I had an X-ray vision that went to the bone core. At the core of people, there were rather geometric shapes made of what seemed to be hard vibrations of matter. The core-like letters of the alphabet, a capital T, seemed to be the main structural support. An inverted thick L was suspended in front of the T. The Greek letter for the delta, which went almost to the floor, was at the bottom of the vertical bar of the T and seemed to be a support for the whole structure. On top of the letter T, I saw a rope-like strand, perhaps an inch in diameter. It went through the top of the luminous sphere, as if what I was seeing were indeed a gigantic head, a gigantic bead hanging from the top of a drooping gem. Crazy! Once Don Juan had presented to me a metaphor to describe the energetic union of strands of human beings. He had said that the sorcerers of ancient Mexico described these strands as a curtain made from beads strung on a string. I had taken this description literally and thought that the string went through the conglomerate of energy fields that we are from head to toe. The attaching string was seeing made the rope shape of this energy field of the human beings look more like a pendant. I didn't see, however, any other creature being strung by the same bead string. Every single creature that I saw was a geometrically patterned being that had a sort of string on the upper part of a spherical halo. The string reminded me immensely of the segmented worm-like shapes that some of us see with the eyelids half closed when we are in the sunlight. Don Juan and I walked in the town from one end to another, and I saw literally scores of geometrically patterned creatures. My ability to see them was unstable in the extreme. I would see them for an instant, and then I would lose sight of them, and I would be faced with the average people. Soon I became exhausted, and I could see only normal people. Don Juan said it was time to go back home, and again something in me lost my usual sense of continuity. I found myself in Don Juan's house without having the slightest notion as to how I had covered the distance from the town to the house. I lay down in my bed and tried desperately to recollect, to call back my memory, to probe the depths of my very being for a clue as to how I had gone to the Iroquois town and to the railroad station town. I didn't believe that they had been dream fantasies because the scenes were too detailed to be anything but real, and yet they couldn't possibly have been real. You're wasting your time, Don Juan said, smiling. I guarantee you that you'll never know how we got from the house to the Iroquois town, from the Iroquois town to the railroad station, and from the railroad station to the house. There was a break in the continuity of time. That is what inner silence does. He patiently explained to me that the interruption of the flow of continuity that makes the world understandable to us is sorcery. He remarked that I had journeyed that day through the dark sea of awareness, and that I had seen people as they are, engaged in people's business. And then I had seen the strain of energy that joins specific lines of human beings. Don Juan reiterated to me over and over that I had witnessed something specific and inexplicable. I had understood what people were saying without knowing their language, and I seen the strain of energy that connect human beings to certain other beings. And I had selected those aspects through an act of intending it. He stressed the fact that this intending had I done was not something conscious or volition. The intending had been done at a deep level and had been rolled by necessity. I needed to become cognizant of some of the possibilities of journeying through the dark sea of awareness, and my inner silence had guided intent, a preneural force in the universe to fulfill that need. So I hope you guys enjoyed that portion of Carlos Castaneda, the interplay of energy on the horizon, and the journey through the dark sea of awareness. I hope you got something out of that. If you've had experiences like that, where you could see people's energy, their light beings, if you've been thrusted in journeying, please link and write a comment below. I would love to hear it. You can email me if you feel that it's something personal that you don't want to share to the public. I would love to hear it. We're all going through this journey together. I know for myself today, I feel very staticky, very in and out of my body. The sun keeps coming in and out. A storm might be approaching. It looks really dark outside, but then the sun's shining. It's one of those really energetic days. So I'm taking it as it is. But I really wanted to get more passages read for you guys. I hope you share, like, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Sending each and every one of you love and light. Thank you for your prayers. And if you have it within you to help me, all my information will be linked down below. I can't do this without you guys. Things are still very rough, even though there's mandates that have been lifted. It's for the people who did that, not for people like me. So this shiv keeps happening. That keeps happening to me. But I think it's okay. I'm all guided, so we'll see what happens. I hope all of you have a great day. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.